This is the I'm Uncomfortable podcast, the podcast for people who want to be okay with being uncomfortable. We're your hosts, Vanessa
and Melissa.
Today, we are joined by Zach Watson. Zach is a mental load coach that explains mental load to men so women don't have to. Zach creates content that explains how mental labor, aka invisible labor, shows up in relationships and how to address it. Zach is a certified fair play facilitator, so hopefully you can share more about that later, that hosts various courses to help support the conversations needed to spark change in relationships and households for both couples and individuals. So with that, I'd officially like to welcome Zach to introduce himself and tell us where you got started and tell us more about your work.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Melissa, for having me. Oh boy, can I swear?
Yeah.
Feel
Okay.
free.
So where I started, is the long. Would you want the medium, long, or short version of where I started as a
Ooh,
coach?
Let's do
medium.
medium. Yeah.
Okay. I'll say that it started. The long version includes some of my upbringing, but the medium version is more of I started TikTok. I took that seriously in 2021.
Hmm.
I was doing a lot of personal growth content, talking about just books I was reading, David Goggins, and a little bit of the uh, just like habit books and stuff. Um, our now 3.5-year-old was born 2021, and I stuck with my goal, which was just making one TikTok every single day. I ended up doing like 7 a day during 4 months of paternity leave,
Oh, wow.
because I made my first 2 or 3 videos talking about being a dad.
Yeah.
One of them was the sixth S of soothing your children, which mostly it's advertised as 5. And I said, y'all are missing one. There's a sixth one of like putting my wife's shirt on so that she can our infant thinks that they're smelling mom.
Oh.
So that video did really well. And I had a bunch of moms following me, like about 10,000 from nothing.
Wow.
And then I made another video talking about how I was I was my wife was committed to breastfeeding our child, and so she said, "Hey, if you can't soothe her within 10-ish minutes, like
Mhm.
your job is to come wake me up. I don't care what time of night it is."
Wow.
And so I made a video. It was just one of those nights I'd already woken her up 3 times, and I was feeling a lot of shame and kind of guilt and sadness about it. Um, and I turned the camera on, and it was a video of me and my newborn crying in my shoulder. And I said the hard part for me is not listening to my child cry, but it's knowing that Alyssa expects me to wake her up if I
Oh.
can't settle her. I
Yeah.
was just sharing like gratitude for the sacrifices that a lot of moms put in. And part of the reason that video did well was because a lot of people misunderstood the first 30 seconds of it. It was a 51-second like caption story. Um,
Oh.
and so a bunch of people thought I was saying that I wasn't feeding our child from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. And then everyone's like, "You're an idiot. Watch the rest of the video." So that hit 5 million, and I ended up with like
Oh, wow.
50,000 followers. So all of a sudden, I was kind of catapulted into having a really significant woman mom audience. So I talked about, just what I was doing on paternity leave,
Hmm.
the challenges that I was going through as a new father. And
Okay.
then the following year, I was asking my audience, like, what book should I read next? And multiple people said I should read Fair Play. So I know
Huh.
you pointed out that I was a Fair Play facilitator. So
Yeah.
um, a couple people recommended it. I started reading the book and sharing my insights from it, kind of live, because she describes it, Eve Brodsky's the author, as a love letter to men. I was like, it's not a fucking love letter. It's like, this hurts. But like, I think that my audience had grown to appreciate like the vulnerability I was able to accomplish, like of like not taking myself seriously, but also like critiquing myself in real time.
Hmm.
Um, so I started talking about the book. At some point, like we were starting to implement the fair play method, which the general idea is you got to see the invisible labor that exists in your home. Once you can see it, then you can start creating protocols around it. We call them minimum
Okay.
standards of care.
Hmm.
So like the dishes should be done this way, and when the dog needs to go out, you also got to do this with his collar and this with his food. So I made one or two videos talking about the mental load that I thought I added for my wife.
Mhm.
Um, and the internet was like, yes, more, please.
Hmm.
So the first video is like 100,000, which was pretty good. Second video I put up was at 6.4 million,
Wow.
which was
Okay.
my all-time, I think, fifth best performing video or something. And it
Uh-huh.
started off with an example of where I added mental load for my wife, part infinity. And it was simple of me saying, I could have asked my wife. I said, like, we were putting our 1.5-year-old down for a nap, and I said to her, should we do water or milk? And I just put the question to her to answer.
Hmm.
And I said, well, if I were looking back on it, I probably could have said, well, I'm thinking we should have done water because of X, Y, and Z, or
Okay.
I'm thinking milk. We could do either or, but I'm
Huh.
thinking this. So even just the consideration of my answer to the question rather than just putting it
Putting
on
it on
her to
her.
choose, which we do in our careers. Like if I really wanted to get on a podcast, I would say, hey, here are 3 times that work really well for me. Which of these work?
Hmm.
Not, hey, what's a good time for you?
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
so I started talking about mental load, and like any good content creator, if something hits well, you keep fucking talking about it.
Yeah.
So I made another 20, 30 videos. Fair Play invited me to become a Fair Play facilitator. And then I started getting messages, like a lot of them saying, please make content for my husband to like understand. So at that moment in time, I was doing a little bit of, I was not super kind to the other guys. I think I was a little bit on my high horse and like talking shit to a lot of them and saying like, guys,
Okay.
if you're not doing this, then that's why your wife's mad at you for good reason. And so I pivoted back mid 2023 and said, I want to help. I want to help myself 3 years ago. Like
Mm.
my younger self is my client. Someone that's either get a newborn or just like doesn't understand the mental, it doesn't understand why his wife is pissed when he says, "How can I help around here?"
Ugh.
Um,
Yeah.
so that was what I kind of pivoted to. And about a year ago, I left my job to become a full-time coach for helping men understand mental load.
Wow,
Ugh. I know, that's
congratulations.
That's
Thank you.
amazing. It seems like part of what's made you really successful, at least from what you've shared so far, is like your willingness to reflect and to be vulnerable, which we love here at the I'm Uncomfortable podcast. And so, in that same spirit, we're going to ask you to share just a little bit more before we jump into our questions. We always ask what's been making our guests uncomfortable. So, in that same line of vulnerability, Zach, what's been making you uncomfortable lately?
Yeah, so one of the things I work on with a lot of my clients is taking on more of the mental load. And one of the things that was like perfect example of where I'm still in the trenches, like figuring out how to own it with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
So we recently moved, and we're working on finding a daycare situation for our toddler. And at one point, as Alyssa was talking about like some of the daycare options, I was like, how many hours have you been researching this? She's like, I don't know, like 8 to 12. I'm like, Jesus, like you're significantly farther ahead of me on this. And so what I think I've been feeling uncomfortable about lately is it's another moment of where she is just high performing. She's a planner. She's like a straight A 4.0 student. Meanwhile, I skid by with 3.0 and by the seat of my pants. Um, and I think knowing that all these moments are great opportunities for me to like see where I'm still failing as a recovering man child, and not like elevating to what I think a lot of my clients see me as.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like seeing, understanding, admitting where I'm falling short of where my ideal place is,
Mm-hmm.
and being transparent in a useful way that gives people hope, but at the same time, um, admits that I'm not perfect.
Yeah. Wow. Well,
Transparent in a helpful way.
yeah.
I appreciated that phrase specifically
Mm-hmm.
because again, it kind of speaks to your willingness to take a moment to reflect and check in with yourself and your progress. Like, yes, you've made a lot of progress and you've helped a lot of people, but where else can we continue to improve. Love that. I did want to talk about, I know that you were mentioning a couple of phrases already, terms, things like invisible labor. I was watching one of your, I think it was one of your pinned videos on your Instagram profile, and it was talking about the different flavors of invisible labor. So if you can just tell our audience who has maybe no idea about the different kinds of invisible labor, kind of define it, kind of go through the different types.
What does it
and
mean?
how it incorporates. Yes. What does it mean?
What is that?
Yeah, so I'll start with I'll go with like the three main ones. There's more subcategories you can kind of go into, but the first place to start with is physical labor. That's the doing the dishes. It's the things that you can catch on a camera. It's
Mm,
sweeping, although sometimes hard to see the dust. I think you can see it once it's moving.
yeah.
It's vacuuming. It's the things that require physical activity on some level, even if it's really minute, like wiping down surfaces. You might not see the
Mm,
dirt, but you can see it once you pick up the cloth and it's gross.
mm-hmm.
Um, so that's the first place, physical. I typically call it domestic labor.
Okay.
And part of the reason that we call it invisible, one is because it's hard to physically see, but it's also like it's not seen by our economy. It's not seen in a value standpoint. So I
Right.
think we look at domestic labor and we often we don't put value to it the same way that we put the value to, work in sales or things that correlate more with money in a
Mm-hmm.
capitalist environment.
It's still things that need to be done, but it's just not put into that kind of framework.
Right.
Interesting. Okay.
The second one is cognitive labor,
Mm-hmm.
and when it's in different sentences, it fits in as mental load.
Okay.
So these are often things that are keeping you up at night. We have to have that doctor's appointment.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you said you were going to schedule that thing with the therapist. Like, did you do that? Following up with somebody.
Yeah.
So it's like a lot of remembering, it's thinking. I would say you can usually see it on camera, and it looks like this. So it's usually this puzzled look where you're kind of pointing to the stars and you're like clearly trying to figure something out. Um,
Okay.
but it's invisible because it happens inside of our heads,
Mm-hmm.
usually more of a left brain, like calculating, concerning ourselves with something. I think I've seen that there have been a handful of videos talking about mom math. That's usually pretty cognitive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I know that the two of you don't have kids. I think a lot of places that moms see it are thinking about all the needs of the family members, thinking about
Yeah.
all the things
Yeah.
that need to happen, and the pre-steps to doing all those things that I think a lot of women start drowning
Yes.
in motherhood, and definitely are seeing, the beginning of the iceberg, before motherhood. Um,
Interesting. Okay.
and then there's the third one, which we call it emotional labor.
Yeah.
Rose Hackman talks about in her book Emotional Labor as the sort of the manipulation of emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So at the beginning, when we were talking before this, like there were moments when I didn't use emotional labor, when you'd said, the amount of time that you take on editing your podcast, and I'm like, no, I decline. Like I decided to be very direct with the two of you
Yeah.
rather than being like, "Are you sure?" and like kind of soften the tone of what. Now, sometimes directness is fun. Sometimes it's easy. I would
Mm-hmm.
say when we are using a tone of voice that is not easy to us, then that's emotional labor. I saw a
Mm.
TikTok the other night of this girl that she's a nail tech, and this woman, she started recording herself and she's talking to someone off screen, and this woman is saying to her like, "Hey, like I really don't like the color. Like, can you fit me in? Like, can we keep working?" And she's like, "No, I have another client." And the
I
whole
saw that
video is
one.
five
Did you?
minutes
Yes.
of her talking down and like saying that like, no, I can't do that for you. I'm sorry, I don't know what to say here. Um,
I need to see
and
that. I haven't
so
seen that.
and so the whole time you're just watching in agony, like, God damn it, someone ripped the band-aid off this conversation. Like, lady, we're not doing your nails for free. We're like just like get out of her office. And
Yeah.
I think for her, it would have been emotional labor for her to be really direct and say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I actually need you to leave now. Versus, I think for a lot of other people, the emotional labor would have been what she was doing, which is being really soft, kind,
Patient.
thoughtful, non-aggressive, patient. Yeah.
Yeah, even though it didn't need that. Okay.
And like you could even say that adding emojis to the end of your sentences in a text or in an email could be considered emotional labor because it's conveying body language, it's conveying the softness of
Yeah.
or the directness of how you're speaking.
Hmm.
Interesting.
And I
Okay.
think the last sort of aspect of emotional labor is sort of the concerning of certain things. So knowing that my toddler is going to appreciate having a couple of her stuffed animals in the bed, and the cognitive labor of like thinking about what's physically needed. Oh, it's in the living room right now. I need to bring it to the bedroom,
Hmm.
but also like concerning yourself with making that a priority and saying, oh, she's not going to go to bed. She's going to have a crappy bedtime, and we might be up an extra hour and a half if it doesn't go smoothly at first.
Hmm.
That's I would also call it emotional labor.
Got it. Okay, so I'm kind of curious. I know you gave us like your backstory of how you are where you are now, but one of the examples that you just gave really stuck with me in terms of motherhood. I mean, a couple of my friends are moms, and I know there was one night where one of my friends in particular was frustrated, and she was sharing something like an issue about a bottle. And she knew that this bottle needed to be done XYZ or washed at X time for this reason for the baby. But she was really tired or felt really tired of being on top of her partner about it and wanting him to just kind of take the initiative to get that thing ready. But she didn't want to say anything. And she felt like she was in a kind of like I guess like a catch
A
22 of
cycle.
like, I don't want to parent him, so to speak, or nag him to get this thing done, but she's thinking about it. And so I'm curious. I know you have a toddler now, but is that kind of the driving force behind you wanting to help other men with this, or what made you specifically feel like, oh, this is a thing that I need to help men with?
I think it started that, I think when tens of thousands, or I think at that point I was eclipsing 100,000 followers. When you have about 100,000 women asking you to do something, you want to do it. So I'll
Very
start with
convincing.
that, be pretty real with you. Um, So I think that's where it started is I wanted to put out education on it.
Okay.
And I think there was definitely a moment where I had to be real with myself and that like it would be fraudulent. It would be very red pilly for me to put out coaching services for women. Here, women, let me tell you what you're doing wrong. Let me mansplain this to you. Um,
Okay.
so I think it was that moment of like I think the other issue is like because like I have a 91% woman audience, it's
Mm.
like I was often rounding to 100% and saying I don't have men that watch me. But at this point, right, I've about 400,000 on Instagram, so I have about 40,000 men that are watching me.
Okay.
Um, so I made a rounding error of realizing, oh, that's right, I actually do have a male audience. So I think for a while I was just stuck on this idea that it was only women watching me rather than it just being like a significant majority.
Hmm.
Um, and then I realized like they're the ones that need the help, but they're not the ones that need the education. And like
Mm.
it's men that need the education. I needed this. And I think sometimes like the reason that I've gotten so much traction and attention on social media is because I'm one of the few men talking specifically about invisible labor every single day. And
Yeah.
until the day where I'm not a unicorn is like that'll be a good day when I'm not a unicorn. Won't be great for my business. I'm sure I'll have pivoted by then. But at the same time, like for feminism, for um, the future of my daughter, for your futures, like we'll be in a better place when I'm the norm. And I'm not, as you had said, speaking for all men today.
Right. Vanessa and I you spoke about just now, like, building this future for a better future for your daughter. And Vanessa and I had a conversation in our episode that was talking about toxic masculinity and these toxic male influencers. And there was a TikTok or a video that I had seen where it was a dad that was talking about raising his son and how it's not necessarily less work, because the stereotype is that it's more work to raise daughters than sons. But what he was saying, and his point in his video was saying that it's not easier to raise sons, it's just easier to neglect sons. And I think what you're doing is getting to the point of there has been generations of neglect in terms of cultivating emotional intelligence, so that there's things like this, like recognizing that there is things like invisible labor that typically women are burdened with. So I definitely appreciated what you just said just now, because it's when you focus on those 40,000 men, like it's not the majority of your audience, but there is still 40,000 men that are part of your audience that is willing to take a look at what you have to say and learn from it. So it's, yeah, I definitely appreciate you bringing that up, and it definitely resonated with like that. I hope that you're not the unicorn for very long, just because I do see a turning point happening, that there's more willingness out there. There's like that openness, at least in this newer generation of men, hopefully.
We're hoping.
And that are hopefully raising sons to be better.
Well,
you know?
that just makes you wonder about your upbringing, Zach, though, too, because, I mean, obviously, we're all raised a little differently, and depending on how you're raised is going to affect the way that you see or don't see things like invisible labor. Do you feel like you grew up in that kind of environment where that was, like, encouraged, or was it not, and that's why you're realizing it later? How did this develop for you?
Um, you know, I posted a video a couple weeks ago. I did a feminist fit check. I was wearing a suit for my cousin's wedding, and
Oh, I saw this. Yes.
you did, and
Yeah.
I was just like calling out like the male privilege and what it was like wearing a suit. So I put the tie on. It took me 3 minutes to choose that versus women are going to spend an hour on their makeup. Meanwhile, I'm going to put maybe a tiny bit of water in my hair and go like that, and I'm good. Um, I I get to wear my shoes that I've been wearing for 10 years that my feet did not change sizes, which they do after pregnancy for a lot of women. My body has not changed in the past decade, and so I'm still wearing the same suit that I was wearing 4 years ago, and I could still wear the same suit I wore in college, which is 15, 14 years ago.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
Also, the fact that I was wearing shoes, not heels, if there were a
Mm-hmm.
fire, if there were an issue that were happening, I have the ability to run at a moment's notice. I don't have to take anything off and be barefoot.
Oh, yeah.
There were a handful of comments in there saying, I've never thought about this, and or I've never heard a man say this before. And to your question, my mom has been schooling me on this shit since I was like 13. So I think a mixture of that and my mom was the main breadwinner growing up, and my
Hmm.
dad bounced around different jobs. I don't know if he ever really. I think his retirement has been his longest standing job as a coach at a college for writing.
Love
But
it.
my mom was a teacher for 36 years. She taught biology and anatomy at a high school. So I think it's a mixture of like seeing my mom be the breadwinner, her pointing out all of these like areas of like male privilege. I don't even know if I would have had the word male privilege, but um, I think she's been pointing them out for years. And even when Alyssa was pregnant and we shared it with them, she asked me, are you going to be pregnant with her? And to
Oh,
me, what I knew exactly what that question was, when she cuts out alcohol, are you going to cut out alcohol? When she's going
wow.
down on caffeine, are you going to do that with her?
Yeah.
See, and what's disappointing, and I love you, Vanessa, and the fact that you're saying wow with that like shock value is the sad part of our society, is that is wow. And
Yeah.
like I think that it makes a lot of sense to me when I hear women say the bar is in hell, because that occurs to me as like that occurs to me like it should be a norm.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, which I think is not the norm, and that's why we're thankful for the work that you're doing, and why we were so interested to hear from you today. Because Melissa and I, our episode about toxic masculinity resonated with a lot of people. But we keep trying to say, like, we don't hate men, and if anything,
Yeah.
like, we want to encourage all of us to be better, but more specifically, we want to have a dialogue. We want to talk about it and how to improve together. Because Melissa and I know that if we keep pushing or siloing or like yelling, that's not helpful for anybody.
It's not being transparent in a helpful way.
Yeah, there we go. That's the headline.
I don't know if I fully agree with that. I think like, you know, another, snapshot of like who my mom is for a while. I think there was the Elizabeth Warren like meme, which was like she tried, she failed, and nevertheless she persisted or something. She made that mug for like 10 of her like woman friends and my mother-in-law. So like she took like I think pictures of like her girlfriends that like in their like younger moments of their life and put it on a mug with that quote.
Hmm.
Um, so I would argue, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because like I think being loud, like the crowd needs loud people. Like in this war of fighting patriarchy and fighting capitalism, like you need frontline soldiers that are being loud as shit, and then you need people that are maybe being more strategic and like trying to talk with, on enemy lines and like
Negotiate.
yeah, doing negotiating. Yeah, really. Um, so I think that like that's, you guys being loud, like that's one aspect of this battle, and I think I'm doing some of the other work of like helping other men see what we need to see, embrace the invisible labor and take it on.
Mhm.
Um, and like I'm finding like the hour before I jumped on with you guys, was our weekly book club is one of the aspects I have in my community, and we're reading For the Love of Men by Liz Plank. And this year and last year, like guys have been inspired to like talk about these things and talk about masculinity with their guy friends and deconstruct some of what that looks like in their friend groups.
Melissa's so excited. She's crying.
I know, this is great. I can't wait to share all of this with my partner. I did want to ask, in your book club or just when you work with couples or men specifically, what are the common kind of baseline questions that they come into these conversations with you with? I guess I just want to, like, what are the top three concerns or issues that they are looking to address,
Or maybe like too
when they come and speak
scared,
with you?
because I
Or
know
yeah.
I know it's like we can be loud. However, there are some people who then will be like a little hesitant or shy or scared to post their question. So what are the most common ones for sure? But then like also what are the ones that they don't want to post publicly?
The more uncomfortable ones.
Yeah, there we go.
Um, I think a lot of guys like they want to ask questions like why is it why does my partner flip out when I come home and say how can I help? Because all I want to do is help. All I want to do is like contribute.
Yeah.
I think I mean, probably any woman listening to this knows the answer to that question already, but I think and one of the skills that I work on with a lot of guys and even a lot of women too is labeling. So I'm going to be a little jargony here on purpose, because when we get better at using that language, it's easier to convey invisible things. So when, let's say, mama's been with the kids, whether she got off of work and she picked them up from daycare and she's working on three or four things, and he comes home a little bit later and he's been working and he's tired too. And he says, how can I help? What he's just done is he's defaulted her as the project manager of all things that need done around the home.
Mm.
Um, in that, he's put the mental load onto her to identify what tasks need to be done, which ones are priorities, and which ones could be delegated to him, as well as probably doing the emotional labor of, is he gonna say fuck you back to me? Is he gonna be annoyed by this?
Yeah.
Is he going to be resentful of this?
Mm.
Um, how is he gonna receive his said assignment? Is he gonna do it right or is he going to half-ass it? So the problem with that question is that it puts the mental load on her and the emotional labor of adjusting the response to, based on how we walked in, what kind of state that the two of them are in a relationship. So I think that's like a frequent one. I think a lot of the guys don't typically, it's a little hard to say what they have questions for. I think less than a question, it's like they want to know how bad is it really, like where they're at, their status in the relationship, like how much do they really need to pick it up? And so like one of the things that I work on with them, so we read through the Fair Play book in most of the programs, and we do this thing called a 51% activity that Alyssa and I did the first time we implemented. So if anyone watching video over my shoulder is the Fair Play cards, um, it's a deck of 100 cards that are typically existent in homes, all
Mhm.
responsibilities, 40 of them for children, 60 of them for anyone's home. And what we do is first thing I do, rather than like deep dive into it for 8 hours and like figure it out and say, you're accountable for this, I'm accountable for that, is the first goal, which Eve recommends, is just cutting out which ones are irrelevant to you. So neither of you have kids, you get to drop 40 immediately. Um, from there, you want to identify, and this is where me and Eve differ, but I talked to her on a podcast and she liked my method for it, is just identifying kind of where the cards currently lie. So I know both of you said that you are often with your significant other that
Mhm.
guys are not married to. Um, what is a I'll put this on you. What is a chore or like a household responsibility around the home that you probably could share? I know you guys like spend a lot of time in each other's spaces,
Mhm.
but don't necessarily live together. What's
Mhm.
like a responsibility that's shared that you would maybe like for them to own a little bit more of?
That's a good question because I've had conversations with my partner on how when we do eventually move in together, how we've already had conversations of how we would split up like household chores and things just based on skill or preference,
Mhm.
so like for example, I would be doing the dishes because he hates doing the dishes, but he doesn't mind doing laundry and I hate doing laundry. So it's kind of, we've started to have those kinds of conversations. I think we also both don't mind cooking meals. So we kind of take turns doing that or sometimes do it together. One thing I know I would want him to just own is just the trash. Just I do not want to touch any of the kitchen, bathroom, room trash. Like I do
Interesting.
not want to I hate taking out the bins.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to do that. So that is one task that I think I would want to have him own.
Okay.
But I don't know, Vanessa, if you have any that you've encountered that you wish that your partner
No,
could
I actually
own.
sometimes feel bad because he's so good about washing dishes and I'm terrible about like he'll do it first and I'll put it in the counter or in the sink. And instead of washing it right away, and then I'll come back to it, having fully intended to wash it, but it'll already be done. So I sometimes feel bad. But if we're thinking like mental load, I think I do a lot of the organizing of the schedule. So it's like if we have a friend thing, but you have a family thing, I'm the one, like, he'll ask if we have plans, which isn't always frustrating, but I could see how it would be helpful. I tried to get this man on the GCal and he just refuses. And
We just started doing this like maybe 2 months ago where one day I was just sending him a bunch of calendar like notifications and he was like, whoa, what is this? And then now I see him adding things into my calendar. So it's something that we're adjusting to, but it's definitely been really helpful.
But
But
So
I don't
I
think
don't think
either
Vanessa,
of
either
us
of us
answered the
answered the
question.
question.
I mean, kind
that's
of.
I so I'm gonna run a little bit with that one, Vanessa.
Go
So
ahead.
so you have things on the calendar.
Hmm.
It's a little frustrating when he's not on the same page with you and he's asking questions
Yeah.
rather than using a resource that he could use to answer his own question. So
Yeah.
you tried to get him on the Google Calendar. It sounds like you're currently using Google Calendar.
Hmm.
What does he use for his job?
Um, that's a great question. I think he does use Google Calendar, but like they have a work one, and I'm sending them to his personal email address, which he doesn't utilize as much. But maybe I should double check because actually I don't know. I don't know how accurate that is.
The other thing I would say is now I typically am working with married folks and a lot of them have kids, so it's a little different. But what I would encourage is at some point having almost like a sit down with him and saying like, look,
Oh.
this is like a good opportunity of like almost like test driving like what marriage can look like and us
Mm-hmm.
being able to like have tough conversations,
Mm-hmm.
agree and disagree and like find like common ground on something.
Yeah.
So pointing out, look, I have some frustration around like I'm the one that is usually managing the calendar. Um, you ask me and then you ask me again and then I remind you or I tell you and then
Mm-hmm.
you forget and then you ask me again. I know I've seen that video a million times on TikTok.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, part of the problem is that you're just carrying the mental load and he's just borrowing your brain as a database rather than utilizing technology.
Mm.
So um, it sounds like some of the mental load you would like to not have is like just being used as a database. Like he could have that information readily available to him.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could see where it could be created as an expect. Like, I think one thing I would ask him is like, why are you declining? Like, is it just you don't check it often, and like the
Mm.
reminder of it? Like, I
Yeah.
think it could be fair, given that you guys don't live together currently, is like if you add something to the calendar, is like, hey, I'm adding something to the calendar, so I know you're not going to get the notification. I
Mm-hmm.
think that could be fair. Um, and if at some point he's like, I feel like we have something this Saturday, but I'm not sure. I have the ability to go onto my personal calendar and check. So even if he
Hmm.
doesn't use it as a consistent system to add things to,
At
at
least
least
to
being able
check
to,
it.
yeah, at least having it as a resource. Because I think like what that translates to, like not being able to have that conversation, can translate to when you guys are, sorry in advance if I'm like diving too much into your future and
No,
creating
you're
it for
fine.
you,
It's
but
fine.
Go ahead.
um, now you guys are wedding planning and like you're starting to look at calendar dates and the tours that are
Oh.
coming up for looking at venues and he booked some guy time on Sunday and you're like, what the fuck? We have scheduled, we're driving 4 hours to the
Venue.
other
Yeah.
venue to look at this place and we're might be putting down a deposit. And then fast forward to, possibly having children and be like I'm not going to remind you again that we have a dentist appointment on Monday morning that I need you to be there for, and I need you to block off your calendar so that you don't
Mm.
put things also in that slot.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like a willingness to meet halfway and develop standards that don't devolve
Mm-hmm.
as the relationship gets more serious.
Okay, that's helpful because I mean it's like small now, right? And like part of it is I'm usually the one that wants to add things to the calendar, so but I can see how what you're saying like over time, once more things start adding on, our relationship starts blossoming, family gets involved, how it could be a system that if we don't talk about it now,
Establish.
yeah, could it
Yeah.
be a stress later? So that's helpful. Ugh.
I wish I could take all of what you said and just, I mean, maybe I can. I can package it in a way that my parents would receive it.
Ooh.
But it's just, I witness all of those things all the time. That's just how I grew up watching how my parents' relationship has throughout the years. It's just, my mom is that definition of all of the mental load is on her. While he comes home from a long day of work and does ask that question or sometimes doesn't even ask that question of how can I help, and it's just a lot. I could see it a lot on my mom of how she carries the family in that way. It's just very
Well, let me
interesting.
give you something. I'm hoping this could be a little encouraging. Now, I know my dad might be a little bit different, and he's probably a little bit more coachable given the way that we see me today. In that wedding I was referring to that we went down to Philadelphia from Boston a couple weeks ago. My mom that I was on like an hour-long Zoom call figuring out the Amtrak train with the two of them. They ended up buying it. I paid for it. And my mom sent an email to me with like the tickets.
Mm-hmm.
So something really simple of like having the Amtrak tickets. Like one, my first assumption as a millennial is, oh, we're in 2024. There's probably a QR code. I can just bring that with me.
Yeah.
My mom sends an email to me, and she prints them out so that she has them, as her
Physical ticket.
her boomer self.
Yeah.
Um, so so we get to the train and she has the tickets, and I think she actually printed an extra one for me.
Hmm.
But she didn't. We were traveling with my dad and my uncle as well, and they're both in their 70s. All three of them in their 70s. I'm in my
Okay.
30s. Um, and there was a moment where I realized, oh, wow, mom is carrying all the mental load of managing their tickets. And I said, oh, Mom, I'll tell you
Mm.
what, you can use yours. I'm gonna figure this out so that the next time they come around when we hit New York City, like I'll be accountable for making sure the tickets are out. So you can put your paper tickets away. I found the QR code, I used my phone. I said, Dad, you're responsible for the way back. And he's like, "Oh, well, I don't know where it is." I was like, "Figure it out." She
Mm.
said she sent it to you. And so he was a good sport and he let me forcibly carry the mental load. Um, and so he was like looking through his email. He's like, Zach, what did you search for that you found it? And I said, I just searched Amtrak and was able to find it. And then at some point I was like, Mom, did you email it to him too? And she's like, I think I did. And then we ended up coming to that she'd airdropped it to him. So it was in like the files app on his iPhone. Like who uses that shit? Um,
Okay.
but I almost gave him like I almost said to him like, okay, like you're off the hook on this one. But we ended up finding it and he was a good sport. And on the way back, he was accountable for our 4 tickets on the way back. I
Okay.
don't I don't have the same relationship with my uncle that I could force him to. And he tries to have me run his Facebook ads for him. Um
Like, you
so
know the
I
social medias. You can run this for me.
Yeah, whatever you said.
hold on a second.
Yeah, no problem. Important things.
You know what I'm doing over here?
COVID test.
Our toddler just tested very positive.
Oh boy. Our
Oh,
toddler just tested positive.
Oh no.
good luck.
I know. Um, I feel like COVID's just not the same as it used to be. Like it used to be like deadly, and now it's like a common cold. Do we really have to change up our life for it? Either way, that's emotional labor right there, right? Doing the emotional labor for other people. She's taking on the mental load of, hey, I. So when I went for that bathroom break right before we started recording,
Hmm.
she called me and I answered it, and she said, hey, um, I forget what it was. Her mom got COVID. And so she thought, okay, do we have tests in the house? Because we should definitely get tested.
Hmm.
Called me to see if there were some in the house. If not, she needed to get some on the way back. And she just did the emotional labor of, it's uncomfortable. I'm
Hmm.
recording right here. She opened the door and just showed me the little Q-tip and said, like, could you do
Get you
this?
tested. Yeah.
And I know for some couples, like, right, I know there are plenty of guys that would be in this moment and they would be like, no, I'm busy, like go away.
Yeah.
But like we have I know that that was less emotional labor for her just now than it might have been some time ago.
Yeah.
um where was I? So we're talking about, Melissa, your parents and how that's like something. What I would encourage, if you're up for doing the emotional labor of it, there will be some friction. There could be some. I don't know how your family manages conflict, but
Not
there
well.
are. Okay,
Well.
But it's okay.
No, but this is good because it's like a starting place,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
Vanessa I've gone to Vanessa to vent about things similar to what I brought up and she's like, sometimes you just gotta disengage, and I'm like, but sometimes I feel like it's a good moment to engage, and I would love to be able to just have a little bit more insight on how I could do that better. But
so I think so that was like a moment of where I kind of coached my dad. I kind of forced him. I think because he follows my content. He was my very first guest on my podcast.
Oh.
Like
Aw.
he's willing to be coachable and take shit from me. Um, I can't do that with everybody necessarily. And there was another moment, we're also at a wedding for my other cousin, and this is like a year and a half ago, and there was like we're in the cabin, my mom was in the shower, he was down at like the beach area, which was like 2-minute walking distance, and he called my mom's phone, and I picked it up. I was like, "Hey, Dad, she's in the shower." He's like, "Hey, where does she want me to put the beach chairs?" And I was like, "Oh, am I going to turn the coaching mode on or not?" And I said, "Dad, you're a fully capable adult. You can figure out where to put the beach chairs." He's like, "No, no, no, no. Where does Mom want me to put them?" And I was like, "Dad, I'm going to have you make an executive decision on this one. You got this." And so I just declined to hand the phone, like interrupt my mom's shower and hand her the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I'm hoping you could take away from this is there's moments where you can put your foot down. I would bet that you can have your dad take on the mental load. It will take emotional labor on your part,
Mm-hmm.
might take emotional labor on his part to have healthy conflict, but like if especially if it's something that you're seeing is like stressing your mom out, might be a harder hitting moment that like might be worth the not fun part of that conversation that he persisted a little bit. That was a tough one. Even my mom a little bit, she was like she liked what I did, and at the same time just like, yeah, I kind of feel bad. I did give him really specific instructions on where I wanted the beach chairs. um
He's like, Zach,
Me,
help
that he
me,
clearly
please.
forgot.
please.
So I think there's moments where we can decline to be facilitators of one person owning the mental or emotional labor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's like we can there's those opportunities as you look for them, there's a lot more of them probably than you realize.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely the picking and choosing moments of when it when it when it makes sense, or when is a good time to kind of push that boundary.
Yep.
But yeah, I use a similar phrase than what you use with your dad. I tell people when they're trying to ask me these kinds of questions, I'm like, I believe in your problem solving abilities, your ability to problem solve.
Yeah.
I have confidence in your problem solving skills. And then they're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
all right. And then they do the thing, and I'm like, see, you didn't need me to to give you that direction.
Okay.
But
I mean, we could talk to you forever because I honestly now I'm starting to think about our relationships with our parents and how sometimes as the millennial, they tend to put a lot of the labor on us when we're home. Like they'll wait for us to do things, right? And that's like that's a little different in terms of like or not sibling, parent relationship. But I think it still exists, this idea of invisible labor and like all that goes into it. But so maybe we'll have to have you back. But I know that we've been going on and on for a while. I'd love for you to just, if you have any like last bits of advice, or and if you could share if people like what they're hearing, where can they find you, how can they sign up for coaching, all that.
And just to double check, imagine it's mostly young women that are your viewers.
46%.
I think
So-
it's
You know
is
what?
our-
That's true. Let's not round up. There are some men.
But I would say for the majority of your audience, I would say that if you're willing to do some emotional labor and you want the people in and around you to better understand the invisible labor, the best thing you can be doing that's like you could call it a microaggression, you could call it micro moments of teaching, is just labeling. So when, the most common DM question I get is women, wives saying, how do I explain this to my husband? And I always tell them, if again, I don't make videos about this because it's asking women to do more emotional labor, but if they're asking me,
Yeah.
I tell them that the number one thing you can do to have him better understand it is label the things he's already doing that are invisible, which he's doing. So hey, hey honey, like, oh man, like I'm sick of this boss. Like he always makes me stroke his ego for 5 minutes at the beginning of our meetings before he can do anything. Wow, it sounds like you do a lot of emotional labor for your boss. Why will Carl never remember to do his time card? I'm so sick of remembering that from him. Wow, it sounds like you hold the mental load for Carl to remember his time card all the time.
Mm.
If we can be labeling the invisible labor, which in the some of the corporate workshops that I've done, this is all we do. We do vocabulary, and then we work on like having a session of like identifying a unspoken agreement and like creating standard operating procedures around it. Is just labeling, using that language, improving the way that we can articulate moments of labor that make us uncomfortable. And then I think from there, you have a lot more permission once you've acknowledged somebody for the labor that they're doing that's invisible. I think you have a little bit more permission to label some of the invisible labor that you do. So for a wife that is acknowledging, wow, you do a lot of mental load for X, Y, and Z, a month later when they're, in emotional distress because they're the only one doing the mental load, is they can say, hey, I would really appreciate if you could help me pick up some of the mental load that I know you're great at because you do in your work, on managing the dentist appointment for our kid next Tuesday. So
appreciate that.
labeling is the name of the game. I think that it's crazy to me how important language is. A couple words that I don't use the word should in my life. I catch myself if I ever do, is if I say that I'm helping Alyssa, because I do not want to make her the default owner of things in her home.
Okay.
And so I'm very calculated with a lot of words. I also don't really use the word but ever. Yeah, I could go on about that one, but I would say if people are trying to get in touch with me, if they're trying to take advantage of some of my stuff, so I work with men. I would say the best place for creating that safe space for men is the Mental Load Basics community. For anyone that's familiar with the school platform, I have a monthly challenge. September was men identifying mental load of their wives. No, October was men identifying mental load for themselves. That didn't go that well. They didn't get it. November was either side identifying emotional labor for each other.
Okay.
December, we went back to mental load and we talked about kin keeping was the bonus. This month, we're practicing emotional literacy and regulation. So every month, there's cash prizes for people that want to work on their labeling skills. That's literally all my channels are. If you go find me on Instagram and TikTok, all I'm using is jargon purposefully to help you better understand the stuff that you're dealing with every day.
Want more of the I'm Uncomfortable podcast? Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at imuncomfortable.podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our Facebook group, the I'm Uncomfortable Club, to gain early access to our episodes and exclusive content. We're available wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.